Well, good morning, everyone. Um, I'll just pull the camera back and say a quick hello. I hope you can hear me and see me. Yes, we're going to be doing the rest of this painting that I started in the last demonstration last week. And it's going to be a couple of figures that we're painting. Yes, it's going to be sort of see what happens, because I never know what's going to happen with one of these paintings. It's just sort of take it as it comes. It's just keep on looking at the reference material. So I will. I've got my coffee, my essential coffee, my painting area. There we are. A few bits and bobs lying around. It should be a bit of a better picture this week. Please let me know, incidentally, if you can hear me in the little messages. It's quite convenient. The messages come up. But this, I've got a new phone with a bit of a better camera on, so it should be able to give you a bit of a tastier, crisper view of the paint. Right, so I'm gonna have a look at let's have a look at this painting and see what we're going to do with it. This is just remind you of the drawing I was using. This is the original drawing I did, and that is kind of brilliant. Oh, thank you, Sheila, receiving you loud and clear. Very pleased about that. Yes, a very chunky pencil drawing I did a little while ago. At this time last year. Yes, pretty much 2 days out of exactly a year ago in the Micropub in Beeston. Now I've got this sort of, if you weren't watching last week, you won't have seen this, a sort of ratty printout of the picture, and I transferred, you can see where I've drawn lines along the main elements to map out where the main elements were going to be, and we have the places where things are happening in the picture and places where things aren't happening. Now, just looking at it today, I usually sort of look at it and think, what's the most interesting element for me, or what's taking my interest today? So I'm going to zoom in, I think, on. I quite like the look of this figure. I'll just position us there, and we can get going a little bit. I've got a new little hook for my painting stick. This is the stick I'll be leaning on. You can see just how, hopefully, how detailed my hand is. It's probably a little bit too detailed. I see all the bits of paint under my fingernail. Now, that's a good test for the brush. You want to remember to pick up your brush. Now then, I'll fold this picture over again and stick it to the board. Just as a reminder, it's an MDF board primed with acrylic, and this is the kind of process I use. Well, I'll be using today. It's oil on board straight onto the primed acrylic. Now then, we've got some dark areas that I want to sort of bring out of this. This I've got on the brush, I'm using a rigger brush, and it's a mixture of burnt umber and ultramarine oil paint, and diluted slightly with some solvent. And I'm using the sort of citrus-based solvent, so it's a bit much easier on the respiratory system, and you can have the windows closed in comparison with sort of low odour thinners and things like that. Now, got my little cotton bud again here. I'll be sort of taking bits off, putting them back on. But this is the paint. I haven't touched this picture incidentally since last Thursday when we did the other one, and I'm touching this. That paint is dry to the touch. You don't know if you can see my finger there. I'm in the thinner places where the paint has been thinly applied. That's been scraped over with a palette knife. Dry to the touch. And oil paint tends to behave in that way. Down here, where there's a much thicker chunk, I would say that was probably still wet, but I think that would be, yeah, it's soft. If I pressed that, it would probably gush out still wet paint underneath because it's not oxidized. But that is dry to the touch. That's what you can expect from oil paints. If you're thinking of trying them yourself. Now it's very nice. It's a nice big display, this new phone I've got, and it's been lovely to get it. I've got it on the go in such a short amount of time. It's been a bit of fiddling about with all the settings, but not too much fiddling about. Now then, that could do with an extra little bit of white tack, I think, just so we don't get much of a shadow. These drawings are kind of quick drawings I do out and about in normal circumstances, travelling around on trains and also leisure time, coffee places and pubs. I'll have a sketchbook in my pocket and a pencil, and with the pencil with a sort of convenient rubber on the end, something like one of these sort of rotary pencil with these have a little metal cover with a rubber on the end. You can actually draw with the rubber if you have occasion to, sort of smudge the paint over the paper and then take areas of that away. So you're kind of drawing with white in that situation. You're drawing with the rubber, the eraser. These are the sort of darker areas. And really this drawing doesn't have much detail to it, but it does have the original reference that I will have been looking at. This person was sitting there, and I have recorded something of them live. And some of these shapes are kind of, I mean, that was probably an elbow sitting on a table. There was a reason I put it there, and if I keep up concentration whilst drawing, then it'll be a kind of honest mental photograph in a way. You can think of live drawing as kind of taking photos, but with your way of seeing people. So you're a sort of poetic camera, I suppose. You take a little snapshot of how you consider what you're seeing. These crusty areas, they're kind of they look good for kind of wiping, kind of sort of tease some paint over. This cotton bud has got a bit hard actually. I'll sort of start another. And some of this paint is staying kind of wet, but a lot of it is actually soaked into the oil paint on the top already. Excuse me, just have a sip of coffee. I find a cup of coffee quite essential to this process in the morning anyway. Or it certainly is it's certainly a luxury I've come to enjoy. I'm not sure it's totally essential. Now then, yes, I sort of explained last week about the idea of different types of marks at the different stages of the painting, and these are very much this sort of, these have been the chunkiest, broadest marks, and this particular drawing has been quite appropriate for that, because it's kind of moving the pencil around in big chunks in a very similar way to how you can think about how you can consider the paint. It's a matter of sort of looking around for the next thing to describe. If I sort of take this item, sort of move it back again, I'll move it as I think of moving the camera. I need a look out, and excuse me, I need a whole view of the item I'm drawing. I've got to keep the positions of these limbs, this crossed leg. If there's a movement up here, it's got to be in keeping with what's down here. So let's add a bit of detail to this one, and detail and also contrast when there's a darker colour or darker tone going on. There's not much colour happening, but there is a kind of brown tinge to it, so it's sepia tones, I suppose. But I usually start with very muted colours, and then in the later stages of the picture it'll be a case of possibly adding tiny little pockets of colour, and that will bring the thing to life in a way. Or you can add a tiny little bit of colour and control where the eye goes to. Say a little bit of red in this head, or whatever it is, will make the viewer you'll be able to control the first thing that they're looking at, and then everything else is a kind of secondary or tertiary consideration. And it can seem, probably looks like it's a sedate looking process, but it's really quite intense in a way. It builds up as the painting develops, and you're feeling the character come to life, hopefully, if you're concentrating. Now then, I'll fancy letting a bit of paint sort of fall a little bit of thinned paint. This is thinned down with the solvent. Really, it behaves exactly in the same way as water, and with this orange zest solvent, citrus solvent, several brands on the market in the art shop, or on art websites. You can find, you can make the situation very comfortable, really. I think with oil paints, they've got such a reputation for being difficult to work with. I think it's because of the mess factor mainly. That was what I did a lot of planning for it. show you my zoom out again. I've got a little drip catching shelf here, just a bit of MDF and a kitchen towel. The kitchen towel gets reused, it just drips down every time. If I need a huge load of drips, I might just fancy washing the paint. I'll kind of wash things away, and if you let things cascade down, you need something to catch it. This process is sort of stripping away the layers I've put down to a certain degree, not necessarily all of it, but when I want it to be a bit more organic looking, I suppose. Now this face area, getting a bit closer on that, and I want it to go up a bit. So I think this phone is a success with the camera. You're really in close. It's all in focus. Now this face has got to be taken as kind of, you know, if you're drawing and you've got a short amount of time to do it, you can, if you squint at what you can see, then, or if you're short-sighted, take off your glasses, then you get a more simplified version of what you can see, and it will basically be darks and lights. I'm getting some very nice messages from you all. Thank you all for watching this morning. Thanks for tuning in. It's kind of, if you can think of it as a person looking down, there's the head on that side. You've got to kind of imagine up to the end point when that person sort of starts to appear. And the Pottle of Blues Micropub in Beeston, it's there's a lot of people sort of sit and do the crossword and sitting and reading. And then there's a few sort of darker chunks. I'm going to zoom out and move over to the other figure. Got the painting stick again. This is kind of stick to lean on, so you're not making a mess of the oils that you've already put down, because they do remain wet for quite a while. Just move my reference drawing, which is getting increasingly. I think it'd be better there actually. It really is quite a lot closer. No, I think it'll have to be there, and I'll move the camera. Right, now he is, I would say he's a he, and I know it was a he when I drew it, but often when I've been drawing something live and then it gets made into a painting, the sex of the person can change, which is, you should just ride along with that if that starts to happen, I think. Now this face has got, well, I'll do a few more strokes of dark down here, maybe just a little bit further out. Sorry to keep moving the camera around, but it's trying to mimic the way I think about these pictures, and it's quite I don't spend too long on one area at a time. I'll need to keep a sort of overview of the picture, just to check I'm not doing something that is going to spoil it, really. This is a very, in comparison to the other colours, it's a faint blue, really. Still, I suppose, a kind of gunmetal blue. I found myself using my little finger again as a painting stick. It's much easier to have the stick to lean on. Until I discovered the painting stick, I would employ my little finger leaning on there, and then it would be rather painful after a while. Now that face is, I think that's the most. Currently, it's the most I suppose the emotional areas are the faces, and I've found this when I've done quite scary faces. I suppose some people call them scary. I tend to think of them as just as interesting as I can make them. But this is, excuse me. That's my flyer. That's one of the more disturbing, brooding faces, I suppose. A big thing about it is it's staring at you, and when you've got faces that you can recognise as a human figure or another human, then it gives you a more emotional reaction. Now then, just trying to work out what's the best bet for this face. I'm going to go in on that face and use some kind of finer tool. I think I'm going to sort of use a little bit of pencil, and it's a question of keeping my eye on this, on the reference here. And you kind of slow down the movements of your hand. Now I can see the marks I made last week are slightly less than accurate in terms of where those eyes are looking. I do want them to be looking to the right. So I think I'm going to just have to tidy up the side there. A little bit of I've had a week to be staring at this on the wall and kind of thinking, what am I going to do in that next part? So I shall bring that brush down and kind of just try to sculpt around his head as it is. Bring it closer to the eye there, but I think that eye needs going to the right as well. And we have these lines that I drew last week as construction lines, and sometimes it's nice to actually use those as part of the picture or guidance for a sort of sectioning off of the picture. Now that has brought that in a little bit. Little shake of the camera, sorry. This beard thing he's got on his face. Try and get a bit of dark in there. Just going to squirt a bit more burnt umber into the palette. I do find if you use black straight from the tube, oh excuse me, it tends to flatten the picture next to all the other. If you're using any other colours, you get a kind of deadened look, or it's possible to get that, or it can kind of mix in and look dirty in a way. In comparison with all the other colours, and dark blue and brown. I know this looks black, probably because it's in comparison with all the other colours. Just going to have to move this out slightly because I can't actually get the brush in. So I can lean on the stick there. Yes, with a darker sort of black substitute is very dark blue, or dark blue with brown. Going down what probably is going to become the arm, although sometimes it's nice to leave it ambiguous really. It's sort of a shape that could be, that is most likely to be an arm, but may end up not being in the final glance. It'd be nice, I think, to start putting some background in. Now I've done a few of those darker areas. Not definitely sure how they are going to behave when without the background being there. So I'm just going to start to daub a few. I think a sort of white background. Just squirt a tiny bit more white into the palette. Well, a nice big chunk actually, because I'm going to I'll soften the white with just bring this down and show you where I'm mixing. Is the brush straight into this. This is a load of white oil paint I've just squirted out, and you've got a kind of jar of solvent that's had paint diluted in it, and it's kind of just an off brown, off sienna brown. And if I can just dink or donk the white down a tone, it won't be quite so bright when it goes on. It's better to mix each colour slightly than to have it straight from the tube, I think. That's what we're always taught on my course. My very good teacher Gary, who I had always had him for life drawing. Now I like these I like the idea of keeping these columns, so I'm just going to sort of stick to them, and it's making them kind of framework for the picture. I'm not sure if I want to obliterate them quite yet. And these are the lines that I used to construct the picture, and either side of the items they were used like that to find the edge of them. And you can sort of just alter these slightly, so it's a kind of tiling. If these lines stay quite thin, excuse me, if the paint stays quite thin, then the lines will be just about visible, and there'll be something I can decide about later and put more layers on. This is a kind of wash of oil paint and solvent. And they also, in the way I think it, you think of these as characters. You can split them up into their section, and it will give them, even though they're sitting next to each other, they might not necessarily know each other. They might know each other a bit, but they have their own personal space, and it's a visual representation of that, or could be. And I think if I can leave it open to that, you can have not just a structural representation in terms of a building, but also in a psychological way. And if there is a story to this picture, you'll hear it called a narrative, maybe. It's that there are two people sitting next to each other. One is possibly laughing, one's looking away from the other, but there's a distance between them. So immediately you're wondering what's happening between them. Now that's the beginning of a story. It might not be a very complicated one, but it implies a lot when you look at it. When you look at the picture, and you might think that's going to sort of keep me looking at it. That slightly darker colour there. Let's kind of tile this up, and you can think of this as just filling in the background, or you can think of it as a very careful placing of appropriate atmosphere and the setting, and that setting is as important as these characters. It's certainly giving them it's giving them the situation that they're in. If this pub wasn't there, then they would have nowhere to sit, and they're probably pleased to be there. You can imagine they are. Now that is a brighter white on those legs, and this figure can now kind of merge in to into its seat or background. You can sort of translate that if the paint is being pulled into the background, then the figure could be sitting in the seat. And the nice thing about this is it's a bit like a dream. If you think of one thing and then you ride along to the next area with it, or the next experience. And it's nice not to have to set things down too rigidly, make it applicable to what you might be thinking. But the interpretation, there are these words that get overused with paintings, and if you look at it and you get a feeling, then that is, or you get an emotional reaction, it's for a reason, and it might well be because of the type of thing that's been drawn originally. And you're not always given it all the information, but you're given enough to tell you whether the artist is trying to sort of hoodwink you in a way, or make you feel something that is not appropriate to the situation, or to force you to think of something. If you can, it's similar to, I think the phrase is paraphrasing, but I'm not sure. But it's William Friedkin, the film director. He said, "Listen to what the material is telling you it wants to be," or words to that effect. And as this goes on, I will move away from the original drawing, and this will become something on its own. And really, often it's about the stages of this, that they're kind of marking posts. I'll just get a bit of white in there, where this square end brush, I can't remember the actual proper name for it, long flat. I'll give Rosemary & Co another little advertisement. Very good brushes. They're my good friends from the art shows. They exhibit at, I'm afraid it's not going to be on this year, but Chiddickbury Art Fair near St Albans, they exhibit at that. And also at Patchings Festival locally. Now it's a question of looking and looking at what the new situation presents me with. We've got two figures in tandem. I think I'll go back in with the rigger brush, the very thin brush. If you're not familiar with rigger, but it's they were used to paint the lettering on ships, I believe, and that's why they're called the rigger. It paints the rigging, I think. Now then, I'm struggling because I haven't got the reference in front of me. That's all important, but it's a case of moving things around, especially when you've got a small, you're working in close. You need to know your next move more and more, with more and more urgency, I suppose. And the description of this head thing, which is not very clear in the actual drawing, but it will kind of, it might require me to put a little mirror up later on to get the reference from my own from my own face, because that is I'm my most patient model. If I'm needed, I will just I'll be there, because I have a head and I can tilt it down if need be. You just don't have the idea that the artist is painting from nothing is a kind of it's not a very helpful idea. The idea that you're sort of over your art training, you learn how to paint everything, is quite a strange one, because you've got sort of an infinite amount of things and living creatures and inanimate objects as well, or trees, that they'll move and you'll be in a different position each time. When you draw something, it will be specifically in that position, and that's the only time you'll be drawing it in that position, in that state. So you've got to have reference material, otherwise what you're doing will be not relatable to any kind of reality. And just drawing and hoping for the fingers crossed, and drawing as if you're a kind of conduit of a god of art, is not going to get you very. It's not going to get very much that's interesting to another person, I don't think. Certainly not to me personally. I think for that reason, when you've got an abstract picture that you're trying to do, you need reference more. Well, you're in more need of it. It's so much more telling when you don't have it. Oh, I'm just going to move my suit jacket because it's getting a bit warm. Oh, it's going to be a nice day. Now we're getting a bit more blue in this bit, and might be a mistake. But it would probably be nice to merge that around, and it will often look like, I think, when I'm painting, I'll kind of be putting one bit in and then taking it away immediately, or obliterating what I've done. But that's the way I do it. And these kind of wipes down and pushes, they're the kind of paint version of the pencil marks here. Oh, we've used the lens there. Now then, a bit more dripping down, I think, on this. It's also nice to have a kind of whitewash going on these figures. And if you can think of the marks I did in the last session as the broadest, these are kind of the medium marks, very roughly speaking. But it's never too many rules. I don't like to have a set method for each of these pictures, but there will be, if I want to leave it open for myself to be able to go in for some extra detail if I want to. Let's go for a bit more pencil on this. Just move this camera up so we can get really close and take advantage of the new phone. Now then. Back in with the pencil, and it's a question of, I think that eyebrow needs a bit more bringing out. It's a kind of, when you've got the pencil like this, you can either move it, you can use it in its traditional way, draw over the top of the paint, smudge it over the paint, or use it to move the paint around, which is what I can do here because it's staying wet in this dark area. You sort of scratch it round and you'll get a bit of live mixing. And then he has a kind of whitish area to the right of that eye. Just got to wash the brush. Make sure I don't get too much blue on this. So the stakes heighten as you carry on painting. Now I think that face is sort of split up eye-wise. It's a kind of start of side of the eye. We've already got that mouth. It's a sort of constant game of spot the difference, really. It's a bit like that. I'm looking constantly at the sketch. And at this stage, certainly, I can't allow myself to not look at it, because then it's, I'm basing it, I might be running into a problem later. And let me just bring it closer in on this because I want to just have a good look at it. It's a question of I think it wants more dark on that beard bit. And the more that you look at it, it's kind of like the more you're getting into a good book, you learn the thing, and this drawing is composed of different weights of line. I'm trying to find the translation of it. As well as the basics of the drawing, sort of, has he got enough hair? Are his eyes in the right place in relation to everything? Now, if I can get that part correct, then everything else will be a little bit easier, because I won't have to be making adjustments as I'm going. Is kind of a little bit of extra on him. Come down a little bit again. Now it's there's possibilities now. We can, I think, carry on with some of this white. But you'll start to, in the drawing there, it's a kind of smudge down that area. I want to be able to use that to some amount. Get a bit of thicker white with, oh, there's some brown on the brush. I like what that's doing. That's a total accident. There it is, hiding on the other end. And these moves are kind of like the feeling in a half light, feeling around in a half light. I can sort of see. And it may well be this when I do finish this, which will be in another of these sessions next week probably. So I'll give you a couple of days advance warning again. The finished one might have a very different feeling to that. I would say that is because of the expression on the face. I suppose it's got more of a jovial feeling. This may end up, these faces become a bit more, the faces will dictate what the emotion is, maybe. Thank you all for your nice comments. Now this paint is beginning to sort of mimic that smudged pencil, but as well as the pencil mark doesn't give you that physical raised line, the relief element of the paint, and that gives you an extra line really when the shadow falls on it, or when the light falls on it and the shadow is created. So that is another sort of extra element that the paint can give you. Listen a bit closer again. Hopefully the new phone is handling it. I'm very pleased with this thing. Yes. I like the idea of just smudging a few things with. I might use the cotton bud because I think I want to do it with my finger, but it's a case of my finger being a bit too big. I do have a little. I've not been using it that much, but it's a little homemade. It's a thimble. Looks like a finger puppet. It's a thimble with a little bit of blue tack and cloth. It was meant to be for smudging, but it's sort of dried on the top there. But you can remold the blue tack. That's a bit big for my purposes now. I like the idea of smudging some of these around. The smudge is as much a valid way of painting as the brush, but it doesn't take away the necessity for the brush. I think when you need different types of marks, all working next door to each other, setting each other off and contrasting with each other. So anything you can get your hands on reasonably that will make your painting leap out of the picture and mimic reality. If you just look around you now, I might have mentioned this last time, but you have if you look at what's in front of you, you've got light being fired back at your eye from different things that you can see. And if you can see a shiny metal item in comparison to some wood, then, or the painted wall, then you've got an explanation of what things are made of. If it's harder and yes, if it's harder, stronger, made of shiny material, or a metallic type of surface, you can find a mark to use to explain that in a painting. But you're sort of in control of all of those, so you can sort of imagine how you can making the decisions as you go. You can do it to a more or less controlled amount. And you can imagine someone who paints pictures or makes pictures that look like photos, that they will have a very strict method for all of the elements in the pictures. Whereas I prefer to do things where I'm not sure what's going to happen, apart from the fact that I'm looking at the reference, and I've got marks that I like. I've got the smudge, the chunk of paint, the different things that I apply the paint with, like a palette knife or a cotton bud or brushes. They all go together, or even my finger, or the sort of paint running down, which I will do again. Just it often feels correct to have that happen when I've done a little bit of detail. By the way, the paintbrush will run down like that. If it's held brush down, the liquid will run out of it more easily, or at all. If it's held the other way around, all the liquid collects in the base of the bristles, and it just won't come out, and it'll drip back down into your hand. Now he's got a kind of crust that's developed on his face, which I like. But some of that dark is still showing through. I think that's made him look a little bit more. He's pondering something, I think. He's sort of unsure. And possibly I can follow that along emotionally, or in terms of he's got less of a big grin, and it's more a sort of just after he's had a big laugh, and it's a situation where it's like, why did I laugh at that? Oh, what's my next move in life? And it might be nice to follow that along. Now, the more detail I'm adding, I can see the eyes are slightly skew or in comparison with the drawing, which I'm sorry isn't pinned up next to the painting, but it's it's now wet paint next door to it, which was going to happen. Now then, get that brush in. It's underneath the eye there. And I can kind of switch. I'm switching over into thinking about where the lighter parts are. And if I just bring that in, I'll fold this over, and then you'll be able to see. Oop. That drawing has lighter parts and darker parts. I was looking at just the darker parts before. Now I'm thinking, let's take big blobs of the white that shows shine on the face, and kind of use that to draw with. It's ever such a strange effect. If you're actually looking at the screen and painting, there's a very slight latency. So I'll move the brush and then the movement will happen. So it's a bit like, it feels a bit like being drunk. But I promise you I'm not drunk. Now, the lovely thing about oil paints is you can actually hope to mix those things live, because they're still both wet, those items. So I'm going to kind of merge them where they touch each other. Big sort of cascade of organic marks. And by organic I mean they've done themselves, they're alive. Running about. And it is nice actually, the phone screen has a it homogenizes the whole image, and I can look at that and use that as an extra element of the painting. So while it's it's a different experience to painting without the phone in front of me, I've now got two paintings that I can use to get ideas. I've got two images rather than just the one. A bit like sitting there having a conversation with someone through Zoom, but you're actually there with them. Now he's getting a bit. And I think that is developing down the way of. It's more of a sullen emotion. But the contrast of the dabs I've been making with the cotton bud, and also the painted marks there, those crisp painted marks, firing off that very nicely. These things, these marks coming from the head, you could think of them as as his thoughts being represented, if you had a mind to. And if you look at the picture, you can think, oh well, it's a kind of energy radiating from him, and you've really got a load of possibilities, and it keeps it. If you're approaching a painting and thinking, oh well, it doesn't look like the person. If you try to do a person, then it's it's a very limiting way of thinking. If I can use the reference I've got, but make a kind of emotion picture from it, then that is so much more interesting than just doing a representation to get it right. I don't like to think of painting as a kind of it's not just a set of technical skills to show. That's why I'm not finishing, and I haven't finished today, because I wasn't worried about just getting it done in an hour. I wanted to, if I was going to do anything to demonstrate a painting, I'll just come round, because we're coming towards the end of this session. I think you can see me. Ooh. And yeah, hopefully you can see me. Yes, it's been, if you can show the real process, show the real thing that I do, and this will be one of my pictures. So it's not a demonstration picture. I don't like to do those. I would rather have it as something I'm giving everything to. Because if it's just a demonstration picture, I won't be doing it as properly. Just checking what I look like on my computer screen. So, and yes, when the marks are running about like that, it's so nice to anticipate the next move, because that's almost I've got lost in that picture today. It's been very nice, and I shall look forward to the next one, and I hope you can join me. It will most probably be on the next Wednesday or Thursday, but I'll put another invite on. But thank you very much for watching, and have a good day. Have a good weekend.